Chill us with EKSE, Monday to Friday, we keep on learning every day. We keep it real, Monday to Thursdays, entertainment Fridays. Just so you know, it's 5 p.m. we're going live now. Just so you know, till 6, don't touch the dial, go. Just so you know, it's 5 p.m. we're going live now. Just so you know, till 6, don't touch the dial, go. Youth Block of the Year, catch us everywhere. Hashtag line EKSE, Kuzofiwa this year. Youth Block of the Year, catch us everywhere. Hashtag line EKSE, Kuzofiwa.
Yes, Baba, to another one. Welcome. A very good evening to everybody at home. You are watching with EKSE live here on DSTV channel 263. Bafethu, we are back on Monday. We are back like what? We are back like umqolo. We do have an amazing jam-packed show for the namhlanje. As you guys know, each and every Mondays, we basically talk about mental health issues. Namhlanje, there's no difference. We are talking World Trauma Day. We do have a sister who's going to be sitting who'll be basically talking about how we can deal with such stuff, with the things that we're going through and the things that cannot be done, that meant to be done. And also, Ulwandile later on the show, uzabe stretch a bit. I hope everyone at home because later we are doing yoga with Lily. Last but not least, Kylie 7784. Please do stand up because we do have Black Soul who'll be giving us a performance saga from 2 songs from the anticipated mixtape that we'll be getting. But ladies and gents, let's start the show. Enjoy.
And of course, man, one thing I say as EKSE is make sure that we drive conversations that are much needed within our communities and just globally. And today is absolutely no different because myself and Ulwandile and our most loved guests are going to be driving conversations around a very important issue. If you guys did not know, today is World Trauma Day, and this is an annual event that is celebrated, rather even commemorated, to bring about awareness about the issue that we face of trauma. It was started in New Delhi in India in 2011, and it has taken the globe by storm because each and every single year on this day we discuss these much needed conversations. How does trauma affect abantu abaphila nabo? And we do know that this was started, of course, because of the high number of deaths that are recorded, due to car accidents that were happening in the globe, and we can only imagine how traumatic it must be to live through that experience, because it affects not only your mental health but also your physical and your psychosocial, or not really your psychological state being.
Yeah, and I love that you mentioned that, and I love that every time we have these very important discussions in the studio, it's not just myself and Mihlali, because we're not really professionals in this. So therefore, we have someone else who's a professional, who's a registered student from the Counselling Hub all the way in Woodstock. And she's going to be talking to us about the different types of trauma, all you need to know about trauma, and actually, if you having been traumatized in any way, like any sort of human being, where you can go to get help. Without any further ado, ladies and gents, help me welcome Nicola from Counselling Hub. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Hi.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. Yes, I'm well. Thank you. I'm happy to be here to
well.
commemorate this day with you.
Thank you so much for joining us. First things first, if someone has never ever heard what trauma is, what is trauma and what are the different types of trauma?
So trauma is an emotional and physical response to an event that has threatened your safety or your life or your sense of well-being, or even threatened the safety or life or well-being of the people you love or the people around you. So it can be interpersonal, things like abuse or child abuse, gender-based violence, violent crime. It can be external to you, where there's been an accident or a natural disaster that you've experienced. It can also be vicarious, which means that you didn't experience it yourself, but you witnessed it or you heard about it. And then there's also the kinds of trauma that is intergenerational. So let's say your parents or your grandparents went through something many years ago. The way that they then raised you will have an impact, even though you didn't experience their trauma, they've raised you in a way that is traumatizing. And then you also get things like historical trauma. So in our country especially, oppression, you've got racism, you've got homophobia, gender-based violence, these things that move through historically, even warfare. And all of these things create circumstances that can leave us feeling traumatized or experiencing trauma.
And the most, I think the most common trauma-related disorder that we've all heard about is PTSD. Perhaps maybe for people that are sitting at home and they've never heard about it before, please take us through it.
So PTSD stands for post-traumatic stress disorder. So when you have experienced a traumatic event, if you're unable to move through that event and to process it properly and you get stuck, that can be called PTSD. So basically, you might experience things like flashbacks to the event where you feel like you're still there in that moment and your heart rate goes up and your breathing increases. You might experience nightmares about the event even years after. You might experience a sense of agitation or panic or aggravation that you don't know where to place. You might have trouble concentrating. And you also might start to avoid the places or the people that remind you of that event or that can trigger those feelings inside of you. And normally, when it starts to impede or get in the way of you living your daily life or in the way of your relationships, that's when you know that there's a likelihood that there's something a bit more serious going on.
And speaking of that, being unaware, how do I know what are the symptoms of untreated trauma? Because sometimes, I mean, you're saying these things and I might be like, okay, I can relate to that, I can't relate to that. But how can I actually know that, you know what, I have untreated trauma that I need to check, that I need to speak about, that I need to talk to someone about?
So I suppose the first thing is being able to recognize the fact that something traumatic has happened to you. And in a country like ours, we are one of the most traumatized societies. It's part of the fabric of our daily lives. We've got some of the highest car accidents, gender-based violence, child abuse. There's a lot of things happening on the daily. So it's first of all recognizing that a traumatic event has happened in your life. But I think, you know, what are some of the symptoms of untreated trauma? Those will be things like, you know, even years or months or weeks or days after an event, you are having trouble with some of the symptoms we mentioned with PTSD, so sleeplessness or aggravation, agitation, but it could be stuff in your interpersonal relationships as well, difficulty managing your emotions, whether it's anger or fear or anxiety or panic, and just a general sense of distress that you might not necessarily be able to place or that's getting in the way of you being able to live your life. Because essentially what trauma does is it creates patterns that we just play out over and over again. And those patterns were how we survived the first time, but it might not necessarily help us now in the present.
And you know, you find that most of the time in society, or just as human beings in general, it's very difficult for us to speak about, you know, traumatic experiences, because when you speak about something, it feels like you are reliving it again, you know. So when would you advise people to seek for help, you know? Should it be something that immediately, maybe if I've been through a car accident or I've been involved in a car accident, should I seek for help immediately after, or should people take their time? How would you advise the setting around that?
You know, I think if you've experienced something traumatic, we are a social species and we do need each other to feel safe and connected. And so I think if you have experienced something traumatic, it's totally fine to seek help immediately, and it would probably be really helpful to do that. But that being said, you know, it's possible to experience something traumatic and years down the line it starts affecting you. So it's trauma, they say trauma is timeless, you know. So knowing when to seek help, I mean, really, if you even have the sense that if you're even asking the question, it's a good time to seek help. And it's completely normal that you should need help in that situation. And I think it's the moment where you realize that your day-to-day life or the patterns in the way that you live your life or the patterns in the way that you relate to other people are maybe not really working for you, that's a good time to start asking for help.
And then where do you ask for help? I think that's a very good question, because some of us are thinking, okay, maybe I do need help about a certain situation, but where do I go? Do I go online? Do I maybe come to the counseling hub? Like, what does that process look like?
So I think it's a little bit different for everybody. You know, a lot of people will go online and just Google, but so at the counseling hub, for example, you know, we're a really good touch point, because you would give us a call or send us a WhatsApp, come in for an affordable session, and you'd be connected with someone who is educated about a trauma approach, who'll be able to help you figure out what's going on for you in a really safe and non-judgmental space, just giving you the opportunity to explore what's happening, what your reality is at the moment, in a way that is completely respectful and holds you in high regard and is confidential as well. Which is important because we don't have a lot of those spaces necessarily. It's different, you know, speaking with your friends versus speaking with a professional. So it can be really helpful just to touch base with someone like the Counselling Hub who knows what we're looking at and knows what we're looking for in approaching trauma.
And quickly, before we conclude the interview, where can people find the Counselling Hub on social media?
Right, so our website is a place you can go, so counsellinghub.org.za. We're also on Instagram. We're about to launch TikTok at some point, so hopefully that happens soon. But the best place is the website at the moment, so counsellinghub.org.za.
Love that. Ladies and gents, that was the first part of our a very important discussion about World Trauma Day. We're going to continue. Right now, though, we're going to an ad break. We'll